Slow CPU, Radeon is actually probably for you. This is actually kind of interesting. An investigation by Hardware Unboxed has revealed a startling correlation that may inform your next GPU purchase. Radeon GPUs run better on slower CPUs by up to 20%.
20%.
NVIDIA drivers seem to have a much higher CPU overhead than AMD's at 1080p and even 1440p, resulting in a situation where an RTX 3090 gets lower frame rates than a lowly Radeon 5600 XT or 5700 XT, which is bonkers.
That's crazy.
This extends even to more modern mid-range CPUs like the Ryzen 5 3600X, where an upgrade from a 5700 XT to an RTX 3070 can lose frames.
Interesting.
Dang. This isn't limited to just Ampere. The same thing happens with the RTX 2080 Ti as well. CPU utilization with a Core i3 10100 measured roughly 10 to 20% higher with an RTX 3070 versus an RX 6800. Other CPUs tested include, these are all Ryzen 5s, so 1600X, 2600X, 3600X, and 5600X. The 5600X is fast enough to avoid the bottlenecks, but will still occur in heavily CPU-limited scenarios, so look forward to that as it ages.
Now, I'm not going to defend like software that causes more CPU utilization. That's a drag. Nobody wants to see that. But I do want to jump in for a moment and point out that this is not in all games. So, I mean, there are some pretty significant games in the list. Watch Dogs Legion, Horizon Zero Dawn, Rainbow Six Siege, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Cyberpunk 2077, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and there are more. But something I would like to point out is that most people running an RTX 3090, for example, are not running a Core i3, or for that matter, even a Ryzen 5. So is this a problem? Yes. But is it a surprise that it took us so long to notice this problem?
No.
Not really, because whether you're a reviewer like us, or whether you're a user at home, the odds of you pairing these very low-end CPUs with these very high-end GPUs are pretty slim, especially because you can get a very performant, I mean, even for the last few years, you've been able to get a very high-performance CPU for less than the cost, like half the cost of a top-tier GPU anyway. So most people were just maxing out their CPUs in the first place anyway. But are there any patterns that we can look for in the data that Hardware Unboxed found?
You're asking me if there's patterns?
Yeah, and then I'm highlighting the things so that you'll talk about it.
Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to deal with something else at the same time. The issue appears to be common to CPU-limited DirectX 12 games, CPU-limited Vulkan games, so like everything, all DX11 games as well, seemingly regardless of CPU load. So basically, everything remotely modern. Games affected include everything, but in this list specifically, Watch Dogs Legion, Horizon Zero Dawn, Rainbow Six Siege, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Cyberpunk 2077, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I already talked about that. All right, well, this turns the conventional wisdom that AMD's drivers are poorly optimized on its head, sort of. I don't know if the conventional wisdom was, strictly speaking, that AMD's drivers were poorly optimized, but that they were bad. Bad doesn't necessarily mean poorly optimized. It could mean that they crash. It could mean that they have incompatibilities or visual anomalies or whatever else. It could mean any number of things. The conventional wisdom has been that AMD's GPU drivers are inferior to NVIDIA's in terms of delivering a consistently high performance and functional experience. One of the other things that has made that story a little bit murkier is that there's more to a GPU driver now than just does it render the game on the screen. I mean, now you've got features like, you know, really, does NVIDIA have anything that matters to you and me nearly as much as their NVENC encoder and Shadowplay? Like that is such a big one for me.
Yeah, and NVENC encoder and Shadow. I was going to say Shadowplay when you said matters to you and me, but the NVENC encoder is a really good point as well. Those two are killer. The rest of it, I find the game optimization stuff incredibly annoying, to be honest.
Yeah, I totally ignore that stuff. I just turn it off. RTX Voice is pretty cool, but I had some issues with it, and so I kind of stopped using it. And like I have a pretty near field microphone anyway, so it's not like it's a major concern for me. So much software has that kind of functionality built in that's like good enough. Like if for whatever reason I needed to stream, like game stream from a construction site, I'd probably spend the 10 minutes like setting up RTX voice and getting it working. But beyond that, it's not a huge life changer for me, because I would think that most people who stream regularly enough to, really dial in their streaming setups, probably just can manage to, put a big blanket on the door if they have a loud neighbor or whatever else. Like there's other mitigation strategies that are more permanent that you can put in place. Anthony has a note here that says, do I need to start benchmarking GPUs with multiple CPUs? Now, Anthony, the answer is no. As a general rule, when we're looking to evaluate a graphics card at launch, we're looking for its best case scenario, because that's what's going to inform people's purchasing decisions, not just today, but a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, when they're trying to piece together, how that GPU fits in against modern cards, because they're looking at it in the second-hand market. And even
this could also maybe be like something you could do every once in a blue moon, where you go like, how bottlenecked are you getting with different setups?
Absolutely.
And then you do a specific video about like weird setups and seeing how they bottleneck, and then you move on, because people shouldn't be running into those situations anyways.
Something it could cause us to change is which CPU we use for our single CPU that we choose for benchmarking. So maybe for something like a $250 card or a $299 card, well, maybe in those situations, we stop using a top-tier CPU, or we use a last-gen top-tier CPU or something along those lines, because we do want to give people, representative data, but absolutely not. I mean, if we're looking at, an RTX 4090, for example, a next-gen top-of-the-line flagship card, we will absolutely be putting the fastest CPU possible, because we want to know how fast it goes. We don't want to fix one problem, which is that we're ignoring driver optimization differences, only to introduce another problem where we are bottlenecking the bloody graphics card and not giving a good representation of what its performance would be in the real world, because most people do not buy a high-end GPU and run it on a Ryzen 5 1600X, especially if they're running Ryzen, because AMD provides such ample upgrade opportunities for that platform. Update your BIOS, ladies and gentlemen. Get a new CPU in there. That's the way to go. That's the AMD way.
It's cool.